This podcast is the design of City Sites Urban Media, and our goal is to bring into focus the difference between culture and God's ideas found in His Word. To learn more, go to citysitesurbanmedia.com.
So many silly, impotent, and silly strategies of missions. I have to believe that all those strategies together are not as powerful as one saint praying, as one saint preaching.
52% of evangelicals agree that everyone sins a little, but most people are good by nature.
Wherever you find true doctrine, you'll soon find it challenged by false doctrine. The question is, how do you tell the two apart?
Because we have dumbed down the gospel, because we're not preaching the true gospel, and we are using carnal means to attract people. If you use carnal means to attract men, you're going to attract carnal men. And you're going to have to keep using greater carnal means to keep them in the church.
Most of my blogs and podcasts have a theme. Most of you know that by now. It is a reoccurring theme that is always examining how well we are maintaining our commitment to God in telling the truth about Him. In my ministry life over the past 40 years, I have encountered many ministers who have spent their lives preaching the gospel for personal gain. They invent concepts and ideas that do not hold true to the gospel narrative. Many of them are either full-blown narcissists or they border on it. Here are just a few examples I found on the internet.
The Word of God is the gateway to the world of wealth.
This from Bill Johnson.
Did you know that Jesus was born again?
I'll go ahead and tell you this now. Don't get disturbed because he said 3 billionaires. Now, I don't want you to get disturbed because since I'm one of them, it'll only leave 2 more. No, wait a minute. Now, wait a minute. Of course, I'm saying this with a smile on my face, but I'm serious as I can be.
Do I consider those who preach the prosperity gospel false teachers? Yes, I do. And the reason I would consider them false teachers is that they are holding up as the treasure, not Christ, but rather what God can bring in a kind of temporary way here on earth. And so that's not the gospel. The good news of the gospel is not that you get things, but that you get God, and regardless of what else happens in life, that's enough.
This is the City Sites Podcast with Larry Kutzler.
The Apostle Paul was concerned about this as well. In fact, he wrote about it in the opening chapter of the first letter to the Corinthian church. It reads this way: "For Christ did not send me to baptize, but to preach the gospel, not with wisdom and eloquence, lest the cross of Christ be emptied of its power." That's very, very important. Lest the cross of Christ be emptied of its power. For the message of the cross is foolishness to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. In many cases today, I have wondered if the modern church has just reversed those scriptures to read, "Christ sent me to preach the gospel, not with the message of the cross, but with the words of wisdom and eloquence." Billy Graham preached a sermon in 1958 where he said this, "And I have found in my own ministry that I can preach anything else, and it's called popular. It pleases the ear. But when I come to the heart of Christianity, when I come to the cross and the blood and the resurrection, that is the stumbling block. That's the thing that people do not want to hear. That's the thing that is an offense. And yet, it's that very thing that is the heart of the gospel. Without the cross, there is no salvation and there is no forgiveness."
The only way that you can ever get to heaven is by way of the cross. And if Jesus Christ had not gone to the cross, you could have never had sin forgiven. You could have never gone to heaven. And the problems of earth would have never had a solution. Only by the way of the cross can we find our way back to God.
Can we remove the heart of the gospel when we ignore the cross in everyday ministry? We spend a great deal of time trying to convince the world our message is relevant for today, yet we ignore the power of its message. I've said this for years, that many preachers have found favor with their audiences by preaching Dr. Phil sermons that have a psychological help in knowing how to better people's lives in their relationships. Yet I wonder if Paul's words in verse 17 of 1 Corinthians 1 doesn't ring true in discerning our times. But to preach the gospel, not with wisdom and eloquence, lest the cross of Christ be emptied of its power. I can't say that enough. I think that is so much of a revelation for the modern church, for you as a believer, that the words that you use and the eloquence and all the slick ideas and things that we use to make Christ relevant in our world isn't emptying the cross of its power. That may be missing from many of our ears today, and that is the sound of Jesus saying clearly from John 5:30, "By myself I can do nothing. I judge only as I hear, and my judgment is just. For I seek not to please myself, but him who sent me." This is the character and the heart of the cross. It is also the heart of the gospel message. What is it about any of us that has anything of value to share other than what God has given to us in His Word? What power do we have other than the message of the cross? You see, we have nothing apart from Him, yet we operate as if we do. In the book of Hosea, God called Israel an adulteress because of her interest in other gods besides Him. The story of Hosea is how God's love for her was always showing forgiveness and mercy to her waywardness, hoping to restore their relationship. And then the prophet Isaiah, in his first chapter, verse 21, said God called His people murderers because of their unfaithfulness to God. It's interesting that they choose those kinds of words, isn't it? The adulteress, the murderer. And it all has to do with their spiritual relationship to God. Has any of that changed? Has it? Well, here's what Isaiah said. "See how Jerusalem, once so faithful, has become a prostitute. Once the home of justice and righteousness, she is now filled with murderers." How can this happen? How does anyone's faith waver and we wander away from the truth? The story of the Bible is about God. It's about how great He is and what He has done for us. Too often I'm hearing the message of the world creep into our messaging about Christianity as it is the gateway to wealth, prosperity, and often a better life now. I also hear how the gospel is about the benefits it has to us, as opposed to how great God is. Yes, the cross is the message of the gospel and has salvation for us, and there's great benefits to all of us overall. But it's not about us or the benefits. It's about Him. He came and He died, and our emphasis should be focused upon the greatness of God and His relentless pursuit of His creation. The cross is the power of God, and my fear is that we have substituted a message other than its emphasis among believers, and wandered away, similar to the story we find in Hosea and in Isaiah. My point is simple today. It is simply this: without the cross, there is no Christianity. Without the cross, there is no good news. There is no gospel. Without the cross, we have nothing to share with anybody about anything. So let's get back to the cross and discover the power of God. The power of God that is in the message of the cross. And that message is not about you and I being relevant to this world. It is about the relevance of the cross and the power that it represents. And I take you back to the Apostle Paul's words in 1 Corinthians 1:17. Are we emptying the power of the cross by the ways that we think and the ways that we preach and the strategy that we use in order to attract a crowd or maintain our church attendance?
You never outgrow your need for the gospel. There's no post-gospel graduate school in the Christian life. The center of every ongoing growth in knowledge has Christ crucified, risen, received by faith alone like a little child at the center of the curriculum. You get up in the morning, you preach the gospel to yourself. My sins are forgiven today. Forgiven not because I'm somebody, but because Jesus was somebody. He died for me. He rose again. He reigns for me. He's interceding for me. He pleads His blood for me. He's sovereign over me. He sent the Spirit to me by faith alone. You preach the gospel to yourself every morning. You receive it over and over again.
Thank you for joining us today. Every Friday we bring you this podcast with interviews with people who are challenging the status quo of Christianity and challenging the cultural norms of our day. Please help us get the word out by sharing the link to this podcast with your online friends and family. Our website also contains other podcasters who are part of a City Sites network of communicators, all sharing the good news of Jesus Christ. Our website is citysitesurbanmedia.com.
This is the City Sites Podcast Network.